Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good morning, Helen. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Yes.
I'm feeling full of energy this morning.
Good.
Yeah, revving to go.
Fabulous.
Still need to wind me up. Let me off.
Okay, well, let's start then, because we're talking about another approach to coaching today.
We are,
aren't
yes. Yes, very
and
exciting.
that's clean language. So I think we touched on it previously in episode 52 when we had that lovely conversation about metaphors. And clean language is an approach that really focuses on metaphors and the metaphors that our clients bring up in that conversation.
Yes.
So where does clean language as an approach to coaching originate from?
It originates in New Zealand.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been to New
Side
Zealand.
of the world, have you?
Yeah, loved it.
Good.
Beautiful place. Completely irrelevant for this topic, but I've been there.
So it started with David Grove, who was a psychotherapist living in New Zealand, and in the 80s. So he was also a counselling psychologist, interested in trauma, done a lot of work with Vietnam War vets, had an interest in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, had an interest in hypnotic language, the person-centered approach, a bit of inner child work. So he had lots of different interests and sort of integrated them into what became clean language. So yeah, very much similar to our approach of integrating different approaches, but this became a very specific thing. So having gone from being quite integrative, he narrowed it down to become something very niche. So, but useful in some ways. So his main interest was in traumatic memories and phobias, so working with war vets. And he found that a lot of them couldn't remember the experience they had, but they felt the emotions, that triggering of emotion. And what he found was if he kind of left them to their own devices, they would naturally talk in metaphor about the experience, whilst not talking about the specific thing. They'd talk about it metaphorically. So he thought there was something in that. So he also became interested in the language that therapists used. So people like Carl Rogers, Virginia Satir, and analysed what they were doing. And fortunately for him, Carl Rogers used to record his sessions. So there's quite a lot of evidence of how Carl Rogers operated. And as we've talked about before in the person-centered approach, Carl Rogers didn't ask a lot of questions. He did a lot of playing back. So David Grove's thoughts on this were that in playing back, Carl Rogers would use his own language and he'd say, oh, so this is happening, and perhaps frame it in a different way. Wouldn't be precise about the language he was using. He would just reflect back what he thought. So David Grove's notion was that this was sort of hijacking the client's own thinking and taking something away from what they were describing the situation as. So if they were using a metaphor, if you then said, oh, well, it sounds like this, and used literal terms, you took away from their experience. So he became very interested in just focusing on the client experience and the metaphors that they were sharing. So
that's where it started.
Yes.
How did it evolve?
So David Grove had about 20 years of kind of expanding on his theory. And there are some videos of him on YouTube. So it's worth going back and watching him in action. And he's very strange in the way that he comes across. So he talks very slowly and in a quite a hypnotic way. Oh. And when this happens, what happens then?
To be fair, that sounds weird. A bit creepy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does feel a bit creepy. And I'm sure that David Grove would argue that whoever was sitting in front of him as a patient, a client, would be in their own little world and wouldn't notice how he was behaving.
Really?
So,
okay.
No, but to be fair, we know that we sometimes will ask clunky questions that we think, well, that sounds like a coaching question, but the person in front of us just is in their own world, just accepts how we are. Yeah. And he was doing therapy, he wasn't doing coaching, so perhaps there's more room to be strange in a therapy room. But obviously there's quite a bit of interest in this different approach to working with people and their stories and in therapy. So a number of other therapists started to become interested. So James Lawley, who we've both met, we invited him along to conference to talk about clean language, and his partner Penny Tompkins, they spent 12 years working with him, studying him and what he was doing, and sort of coding his way of, as much as he'd analysed Carl Rogers, they analysed what he was doing in the coaching room and the questions he was asking. So started to code some of that and create a bit of a script for it. Caitlin Walker, again, she's someone that we've met, Marion Way, Judy Reese. So these are all people that are kind of active in that world of bringing clean language to different places. So Caitlin Walker is very interested in using clean language in education. So it's almost like there's this community of clean language advocates that go off in their own different directions and introduce it to new environments. So I know Judy Reese is heavily involved in sort of information technology, IT, that sort of stuff, and introducing metaphor and different ways of thinking to people that are quite techie. So it's, again, a different approach to it. So there's lots of work being done around introducing clean language in different environments. But coaching is obviously a place where it fits quite nicely.
I think the first thing that I was aware of with clean language was the video that you shared with me of Caitlin Walker. And I think we shared that on our previous
We
Metaphor
did, yeah, on
episode.
episode 52. So
but it was beautiful. It was quite emotional to watch.
Yeah. So that was a TED talk that she did about her work with adolescents who were struggling in perhaps in an education environment, and using metaphor to help draw them out of themselves. So yeah, it is quite powerful to watch.
So we've mentioned that clean language is concerned with using the coachee's own language and incorporating their metaphor. What else distinguishes it from other forms of coaching? I
think the fact that it is just a set of questions that you ask. It's not really a conversation. It is quite strange. So there are, depending on where you look for this information, there are between 10 and 20 questions that you might ask. But at a very basic level, there's around 10 questions you ask. So we might as well just tell you what they are, because it's a very short list. So one of them is actually my favourite coaching question, which is, what would you like to have happen? So that is a question that I ask often in my coaching. It forms part of my Tom's Code set of questions that I might ask. And that's something I borrowed from clean language.
It's a powerful question.
Yeah,
I use it too, yeah.
And it breaks through that perhaps someone's stuck in their situation and not seeing a way out and just focused on the problem or their, what they don't want. Actually, so what would you like to have happen? Lifts them out of that. So it's really, really powerful question. So that's the first question. And then a question of, so let's say someone was looking for some clarity, you would ask, and what kind of clarity is that clarity? And again, that's a question I quite often use, because it stops people. It's a bit of a clunky question. It makes people stop and pause and think, oh, what's he asking me here? So that's another way of delving in a bit deeper about someone's situation. And then they would ask, and is there anything else about clarity? Now, I find that question really odd, because it's a closed question.
Yeah.
And I don't ask closed questions.
No.
So I'm never going to ask that question.
No.
I might ask someone, and what else is there about that?
Yeah.
And interestingly, because we met James Lawley, and I asked James Lawley this question, why do you ask a closed question? Because in coaching, we just don't do that. And he said, because we don't want to put pressure on the person to come up with something that isn't there. I think in asking an open question, in asking, and what else is there? They're perfectly able to say there isn't anything else.
Yes.
But in asking an open question, you would get them to think a bit deeper and think a bit longer about what else there might be about that thing.
And actually, it was on a clean language workshop where I noticed someone shut down their thinking because they were asked this question.
Yeah.
And that was the moment that I realised you were right.
Yeah. I'm not right very often, sometimes. So that's another question that would get asked. So say it is quite scripted, and they might ask that question several times. And is there anything else about that? And someone might give an answer, and then they might ask again. And is there anything else about that? So that's an odd question that I just have issues with.
And and we're not clean language coaches, but I don't think we'd want to be using that question personally.
No. So another question is, and where is that thing? So now going back to David Groves, he was a therapist and he was very interested in the embodied experience of whatever was going on. And obviously working with people with trauma, they might well feel it somewhere. So if you ask them where is that clarity, they might point to a place on their body. And that's what he was really interested in. Was it inside them or outside them? So that became part of the clean language approach, is finding out where something was. And then what size is it? Or they might ask, does it have a size? Again, it's a closed question. I don't like it. But
Well,
that
it
might
will have a size, won't it?
So if we stick to the clean language approach, they would say, and does it have a size? And what size is it? And does it have a shape? And what shape is it? Another question they ask is, what happens just before whatever it is that you're talking about?
I quite like that.
Yeah.
I like that question.
Yeah. Although I have used it in a coaching conversation and it didn't land particularly well. So it's one of those, it's tricky. It could work. It could work well. But
I think I've used it in a sort of cognitive behavioural kind of area.
Yeah.
Where we were talking about something that was happening and what happened just before. So that we could start to get a picture of triggers and responses and things.
Yeah. And when that happens, then what happens?
And when clarity, then what happens?
Yes.
Interesting.
And where might clarity come from? And that's clarity like what? Now, the question of what kind of clarity is that clarity, and that's clarity like what, are really designed to elicit a metaphor. You're trying to draw a metaphor out of them. You kind of, rather than saying, what's the metaphor for this?
Yes, yes.
You're trying to draw it out. Maybe asking, what's the metaphor for this might be easier. So I think that leaving that, and that's clarity like what, comes at the end of you saying, and where is it, and what shape is it, and what size is it? Because then they're already thinking about it being something. If you ask someone how big is it, and what shape is it, what colour is it, then they're thinking about something, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think I quite like that, because if you were to say to someone, what's the metaphor for that, then you're kind of in that thinking rational space.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've gone through all of this process and then invite, and that's clarity like what, you're almost in a creative space where you've kind of gone under the radar of the conscious thinking rational mind, and you're into more of a subconscious way. So I think we start to dig down into more depths with that.
Yeah, and let's say we might well get to that place of embodiment if we're asking where something is.
Yeah. But also asking where it is as opposed to where is it in your body, I think is really important, because it might not be in someone's body. If someone's searching for clarity, clarity might be over there in the corner and I can't reach it. So asking, and where is clarity, opens up that thinking. It could be anywhere, couldn't it?
And then there is another question that gets asked, is whereabouts is that, as an alternative to where is it? I'm not sure what the distinction is between the two. Why would you ask whereabouts is that clarity as opposed to where is that clarity? I don't know.
Maybe it's preference.
Could be.
So it sounds as though those 10 simple questions couldn't possibly allow you to have an effective coaching conversation with someone. But we've seen it done, and it can be really powerful. Yeah,
I've definitely seen it work. The only thing is, I've seen it work by people who are experts that spend it. So, say, James Lawley spent 12 years with David Grove and really honing this. So by the time he came to our conference, he'd probably been immersed in this for 20 years. So was an expert. And when he did his demonstration of it at our conference, it was masterful. It just really worked. I've seen other people that claim to be clean language exponents where it just seems clunky and doesn't seem to go anywhere, and it's not quite, slick's the wrong word, but it's just not quite smooth enough, and perhaps doesn't get to the place that you thought it might get to. So I think it's deceptively difficult. Here's a set of 20 questions. If you just ask these 20 questions or 10 questions or however many you use, all will be well in the world and you'll elicit the metaphors that are going to change someone's life. Possibly. But it takes a lot of time to get to that place. And I know someone who's been on a clean language course. She's quite immersed in the clean language world, but doesn't just use clean language as a coaching approach. She integrates that into her approach. And she will say the person she trained with doesn't just use that approach. She integrates other approaches. So I think it's something that it's quite a niche coaching practice. There aren't that many people doing it. It's quite a small community. I mean, I think it's a lovely community, but it's quite a small community. So, and I think it's because it is very difficult to become really good at it. So a couple of interesting elements of the language that gets used. They use the word that. So what kind of clarity is that clarity? Which distracts people perhaps away from the word clarity, and it's a clunk. So it makes people think a little bit deeper when you say that clarity. They also use the word and when they come in after someone has finished speaking.
Oh, yes.
So that's something I noticed with James Law, that he always used the word and. Although he did used to go, and. So he would use that sort of interjection of it was quite nice actually to watch that. And when you have clarity, what kind of clarity is it? And so and would always precede the question.
To create a continuation.
Yeah, it's a follow-on of the client talking. It's almost like it's part of the syntax of it all, I think. And it has that. It is slightly hypnotic, I think, in the way that it's done.
And is there? I just did that. Did you notice? And is there? And how then do we move forward in that thinking? Because it sounds like we've said, what would you like to have happen? What would that be? What would he look like? What size, what shape, etc. But there doesn't seem to be a step towards that, in the way that we would look at options and how are you going to move towards where you want to be. Is that missing?
Well, I think it's about someone getting a deeper understanding of where they are and what their situation is. So my example of using it within a coaching session was a lady who such rich metaphors she used. She talked about a camper van in the forest. And so when she talked about having a weight on her shoulder, I asked her, and what kind of weight is that weight? And she said, it's a concrete block. It's a grey concrete block. And I said, it sounds really heavy, which is not a clean, that's me implying it's heavy. But I said, she said, oh no, it's really heavy. I said, so where does the concrete block need to be? And she said, I need it off my shoulder. I need it in front of me so I can see it. I said, okay, so if you take the concrete block off your shoulder and let's have it in front of you. It's now in front of you. Tell me more about the concrete block. So she described it and she said, well, it's made up of smaller blocks. And I think what I could do is take some of those blocks out, move them to one side and leave them for later and just use the blocks that are useful for me now. And those blocks aren't discarded. I'm putting them to one side, but I think I could use them later. I think I'm using my hands here to describe this.
Yes.
I think I could use them later. I don't think I'm going to lose them entirely. And that, for her, it was all about taking, it was during COVID and taking some education product from the classroom online. And she was fantastic in the classroom and thought she was going to sort of fail miserably online. So was wondering what she could leave out because all her stuff was brilliant. So it gave her that opportunity to think about it in a different way.
But that sounds like you've taken clean language and been inspired by it rather than following the script.
Yeah.
So within the script, how does that work?
Yeah, let's try it. Let's follow
try
a script. So I've pulled the script off a clean language website. So let's just play it out.
Okay.
So just for everyone's, this isn't us making it up. This is following a script, but it is a clean language script that someone is putting out there as the way clean language works. So I'm going to be the coachee, the client.
Okay.
You're going to be the coach.
Let's give it a go.
Give it a go.
And what would you like to have happen?
To secure some bigger contracts, some bread and butter work, to get some foundations in place, to get money in, get some security, some income. I'd like the comfort of some money coming in regularly, some security.
And bigger contracts and bread and butter work and foundations in money and security and income and money coming in regularly. And when security, is there anything else about security?
Well, there's respect as well. Something about being successful would give me respect.
And something about being successful would give you respect. What kind of respect is that respect?
The respect to my two boys. They're now 22 and 12, and they look at me as a role model, so it's family respect. An inner feeling that I've done the right thing.
And security and the respect of your two boys and an inner feeling you've done the right thing. And when an inner feeling that you've done the right thing, where is that inner feeling?
It's inside, in my core.
And inside, in your core. And when core, what kind of core is that?
It's like a tube, a metal tube, a shiny metal tube.
And a shiny metal tube. And is there anything else about that tube?
It's hollow and it's shiny. It's silver.
And hollow and shiny metal and a silver tube. And is there anything else about that tube?
It's smooth and clean and new. It's solid.
And when it's solid, is there anything else about solid?
It's a foundation that keeps me upright. So there's a stillness of being that makes you do the right things. That's strange. I thought you had to do the right things first, and it's the other way around. Get the upright bit, then do.
And get the upright bit, and then do. And do the right things. And what kind of things are those right things?
Look after myself, exercise, be well, keep the flat clean and the car clean, no rubbish. A discipline about things around the edges. Get up early, do the domestic things, don't ignore them. Keep the tube clean and shiny.
That was interesting.
It was interesting. Actually, what's really interesting was it is just a script. I was getting quite emotional playing that part.
Yes, I could tell.
That's really weird, isn't it?
But interesting because I then wanted to go into different coach mode and ask other questions. So it took quite a lot to stick to the script.
Yeah. But what's interesting is obviously it is a script, but I'm taking it that it was a real coaching example.
Yes.
And that someone came up with the metaphor of this steel tube as a way of giving them foundation, some structure, something solid that they could then take forward from there. So when you said, well, where does it go after that? Well, does it need to go anywhere after that? That this person now has something solid that they can then take forward.
Those realizations that have come about as a result of talking through the metaphor.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that suddenly we've got someone who was looking for regular work, that thinking, actually, I need to look after myself. I need to be well. I need to exercise. I need to be disciplined in how I take care of myself.
So quite a different turn of events in that coaching session.
Yeah. And once he's got those foundations right, then he can go on and get the work that he wants. So it's taken it in a very different direction. So it's interesting. And I'd say it's hard to sit and read a script out, but
It is.
I might apply for a role on EastEnders. But interesting that I had an emotional response to it.
Yeah.
Good. So now in that, there were 9 questions that you asked me there. So 4 were, is there anything else about? 3 were, what kind of is that? 1 was, what would you like to have happen? And 1 was, where is that? So we've got 4 different questions. Like, we're only using 4 questions, but we're repeating them.
Yes. So it's not simply ask these 10 questions in this order.
No, it's not a script in that sense.
Yeah.
But those are the types of questions that you might well ask.
So these are the only questions, or the only types of questions that you can ask in this coaching session, and how you ask them, the order in which you ask them, which things you pick up on, which metaphors you pick up on. That's for you to decide.
Yeah, and that, I guess, is the art of it.
Yes.
Is that with time and experience, you get to know which words to focus on. And it's funny, isn't it? Because obviously David Grove was trying not to take anything away from the client and just to focus on the language, but it's still requiring you to pick up on specific words and to play those back and say, and what kind of clarity is that clarity? And if someone's talked for 5 minutes, it's getting... So there is some skill in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. I think that I would feel too restricted by it if this was the only approach I had under my belt.
Well, and certainly I say I've played with it, and I've certainly introduced elements of it into my coaching, and I use those couple of questions I mentioned earlier quite regularly. So I've definitely introduced some elements of it. And I love working with metaphor. You know, that lady with a concrete block was fantastic to work with, and I can still remember it clearly. And we've talked before when we did the metaphor podcast about someone getting off the train and needing a bridge to walk across to her next port of call. Again, I still remember that very clearly. So it can be really powerful. I suppose what I'm unsure about is whether you do need more. If you were taking someone through a coaching program and you ended up with a metaphor of a shiny metal tube, how you'd pick up on that next time. But actually, you could just ask them how the shiny metal tube was, couldn't you?
Yeah. Good morning. How's your tube?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a bit weird.
Bit weird. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that's worth looking at integrating into your coaching. Just some of those questions that draw on the metaphor without being quite as blunt as saying, what's the metaphor for this? We can start to elicit some metaphors. But I think it's definitely something that I've sort of recently kind of realised in revisiting this, is that you almost need to set up the question about the metaphor. So where is it, and what size is it, and what colour is it? They almost can't then answer that question without a metaphor, can they?
No, that's right.
So you're almost like, because I think the question about, and that's clarity like what? Someone might well come back, if they're very literal, they're like, well, it'll be clearer.
Yes. Yes.
And they might not use a metaphor. Whereas if you've said, and where is that clarity? And they've kind of maybe pointed to their chest or something. And then you've said, and what size is it? And they've given you a size, and they've said, what colour is it? Oh, it's blue. And then to say, and that's clarity like what? They're now thinking of blue things, aren't they?
Yes. So you're forcing metaphors, aren't you?
I don't know, forcing, you're
maybe that's too strong a word.
Eliciting metaphors. Yes. You're inviting metaphor.
But what about if someone doesn't think in metaphor?
It's not going to work.
No, it's not, is it? No.
And I on our coaching program, I run the module where we look at metaphors, and I will always do a demo and invite people to look for the metaphors that people use in that 10-minute demonstration. And sometimes people just don't. I had one lady, and this is interesting as well. So lady concerned was from Nigeria. She spoke English perfectly, but it wasn't her first language. And I think there is a tendency for people who are speaking a second language not to use metaphor because they're trying to be clearly understood. So they'll be quite precise in their language and won't know whether they've got a metaphor right or not. So I think, if you're having a coaching conversation with someone who English isn't their first language, they might well speak in very literal ways that wouldn't metaphor wouldn't be tripping out of the mouth.
I'd also like to say, if people are listening and think they like the sound of some of these questions, or maybe they'll borrow some in the same way that we've said we have, perhaps not borrow the closed ones.
No, I just can't get my head around that. Why would you ask, and is there anything else about that?
And seen
what else
that.
is there about that? Come on. But this is David Grove's work. He was a therapist. He decided on what those questions were, and James Lawley and Penny Tompkins coded that and took his stuff and said, well, we think it's great, we'll code it. And it doesn't really change. It's just, that's it. We're taking this man's work at face value and we're using it.
Yeah.
So I don't think, who am I to say, well, that doesn't work? But I think maybe some evolution of it. If I was engaged in clean language, I would definitely be using open questions.
Yeah. And I've seen it, like I said, I've seen it shut down thinking.
Yeah.
So I think that, we won't be engaging with the closed questions, but there's lots of other questions there that people might be interested in.
What is interesting, the people that we've met that are in the clean language world are all lovely people. They're all very giving. They're all very generous with their time. They want people to get more out of clean language, and it definitely has some mileage in terms of people having better conversations. I think it's just quite restricted. I think if you were starting from scratch and someone that had never used any of this stuff, they'd definitely benefit from being asked some clean language questions and just sticking with their words. And seeking out the metaphor. But we're in that coaching world anyway, where this is part and parcel of what we do anyway. So I think trying to just narrow it down to, okay, this is how you do this, is just too restrictive.
Yeah. We do prefer a more integrative approach.
Yeah. So there you are, a bit of a deeper dive into clean language. And as I say, it's a little bit like the feelings I had when we did the Nancy Klein Time to Think. I'm trying to critically evaluate it and think about what works and what doesn't work. And I'm always slightly hesitant to criticise, in that sort of broader sense, other people's work. But I think we have to. I think we have to be balanced about it, don't we? And not just go, this is great, just do this all the time.
And these people have done amazing work.
Yeah.
So we are not taking away from that at all, but we just wanted to explore it in a little bit more detail.
Lovely. And I enjoyed our script reading.
Okay. Are you getting an agent?
I've missed my vocation, obviously.
And
Lovely.
in the next episode, we'll find out about Tom's acting career. Actually, what are we talking about in the next episode?
Next time on the podcast, we will be looking at tools in the coaching room, and not any particular tool, but how you might introduce tools when you're taking a very person-centered approach to your coaching.
So tools without being directive.
Yes.
Excellent.
Look forward to that.
Yes.
Be interesting. I have no idea what we're going to say yet, but
we'll come up with
We'll
something.
do some work. We'll do some prep before we do it. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.